She said I was too handsome to just drink coffee. And suddenly, my mornings weren't mine anymore. The first time I noticed that cafe, it wasn't because it was flashy or tucked into a busy street corner. It was quiet, the kind of place that seemed to breathe in a slower rhythm than the city around it. I had walked past it countless times without a second glance, but that morning, something, maybe the golden sunlight spilling across its small wooden sign, made me stop. Inside, the air was warm, infused with the scent of freshly ground coffee beans, a faint sweetness of baked goods, and the subtle, grounding aroma of aged wood. A low hum of jazz floated in the background, distant but comforting, like an old friend murmuring just out of reach. My boots clicked softly against the hardwood floor as I stepped in, and for a moment, I felt almost suspended in time. She was behind the counter, moving with a natural, effortless grace. I noticed her immediately, not just because of her presence, but because of how she carried herself. Confident, composed, yet with a softness in her gaze that made the space around her feel warmer. She wore a simple, elegant blouse, sleeves rolled slightly to reveal slender forearms, and a pendant that caught the morning light as she turned. Her hair was pinned loosely, a few strands escaping to frame her face, and I found myself tracing, silently, the line of her jaw, the gentle curve of her smile. I stepped up to the counter, feeling slightly self-conscious. She looked at me with eyes that were both appraising and inviting, and for a moment, I was caught in the quiet weight of her attention. Then she said it, almost casually, with a teasing tilt of her head. "You're too handsome to just drink coffee." Her words were light, but the effect on me was anything but. I felt a small flush creep across my cheeks, my pulse picking up as if the world had narrowed to this single moment. There was something in the warmth of her voice, the way it lingered on the words, that made me want to stay in her presence just a little longer. I fumbled for a reply, something witty, something that would mask the sudden self-awareness I felt. But she didn't wait for an answer. Instead, she handed me a cup with a gentle, deliberate touch. Her fingers brushed mine, and it was brief, but the warmth of her skin, the steady press of her hand, lingered longer than it should have. I felt it travel up my arm, a quiet reminder that there was more to this encounter than a simple exchange of coffee. As I took my first sip, I realized I was observing everything. The way she moved, how her gaze occasionally flicked to me, how she hummed softly while cleaning a counter, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the coffee aroma. I left that cafe that morning with more than a cup of coffee. I left with a quiet, insistent curiosity. Who was she, really? And why did the simplest words make the world around me feel suddenly more alive? That was the first moment, fleeting and unremarkable in any other context, that pulled me into a rhythm I hadn't anticipated, one that would quietly, insistently, make me want to return. After that first morning, I found myself returning to the cafe more often than I expected. It wasn't just the coffee, though it was excellent. It was her presence. There was a quiet gravity to the way she moved, the way she carried herself among the clinking cups, and the faint hiss of the espresso machine. Each visit felt like stepping into a different rhythm, one that slowed me down and made me notice things I usually overlooked. She began to recognize me, of course, though she never made a show of it. Just a tilt of the head, a small, knowing smile when I approached the counter, and a casual comment on the weather or a new pastry on display. That first playful line about my looks had lingered, but now there was more, an easy familiarity in her tone that drew me in without pressure. I started to pay attention to the little details. The way her fingers curled around the handle of the coffee mug, careful yet relaxed. The soft brush of her hair against her neck when she leaned over to stir a cup. The subtle warmth of her hand when she passed a latte to me, fingertips grazing mine just long enough to make the ordinary feel charged. Each small gesture pulled me closer without a single word explicitly stating intent. One afternoon, when the cafe was quiet, we found ourselves lingering in conversation longer than usual. I spoke about trivial things at first, the book I had just finished, a minor mishap at work, but she responded with curiosity and attention that went beyond polite interest. Her laughter was soft but genuine, carrying a warmth that filled the space between us. I noticed how her eyes softened when she smiled, and for a moment, I caught a fleeting vulnerability beneath the composed exterior. There were touches, small and fleeting, that seemed incidental but carried meaning. A hand brushing my sleeve while placing a coffee cup, a gentle touch on my wrist when handing me change, the subtle proximity as she leaned slightly toward me to hear a comment. Each sensation was electric yet tender, a careful balance that made my chest tighten and my mind linger longer than I wanted to admit. I found myself timing my visits, not for the caffeine, but for the chance to be near her, to witness these quiet gestures. I became attuned to the rhythm of her day, the way she hummed while steaming milk, the soft click of her heels on the floor, the gentle sigh when she leaned against the counter for a brief pause. These small, intimate observations formed a pattern, a connection that was wordless yet undeniable. And yet, even as I noticed the growing attraction, there was a hesitancy within me. I wondered if she felt it too, or if I was reading too much into casual politeness. But the pull was undeniable, a slow, insistent awareness that this connection, however subtle, was different from anything I'd experienced before. Each return visit deepened the unspoken bond, setting the stage for something far more intimate than either of us had acknowledged, at least, not yet. Days turned into weeks, and the cafe became a quiet anchor in my otherwise hectic life. I had settled into a routine, one that I didn't fully understand until I noticed how much I anticipated those mornings. Each visit felt like stepping into a small, familiar world where the outside noise of deadlines, messages, and responsibilities faded. It was here, in this soft, sunlit space, that I began to let the edges of my own reserve soften. That afternoon, rain streaked the cafe windows in delicate, silvery lines. The world outside was blurred and gray, but inside, the warmth was almost tangible, the rich scent of coffee, the faint caramel aroma of pastries, the golden light reflecting off polished wood. I sat across from her, our table tucked into a corner, steam rising gently from our mugs. I spoke first, hesitant, unsure why I was revealing these small pieces of myself. I told her about a setback at work, a moment where I'd felt out of my depth, my words spilling faster than intended. She listened with that same quiet intensity one had come to notice. Eyes soft, brows slightly knit in concern, lips parting in a sympathetic smile. Then, without ceremony, she shared a story of her own, something she rarely mentioned to anyone. The loss of a job long ago, the struggle of balancing life and ambition, the loneliness that sometimes came with independence. Her voice was calm, but there was a subtle tremor that betrayed vulnerability. I realized then that the composed, confident woman I admired so much carried layers of experience, resilience, and quiet sorrow. Our conversation was punctuated by small, almost accidental touches that carried weight. Her hand brushed mine as she reached for her cup, a brief contact that sent a warmth through me. I noticed the steadying rhythm of her heartbeat as our palms met, a pulse that seemed to sync with the quiet patter of rain against the windows. These touches were fleeting, almost incidental, but the intimacy lingered in the spaces between words. I felt an unfamiliar tension, a mix of attraction and hesitancy. The age gap, which I had acknowledged in passing, suddenly felt tangible. She had lived more, seen more, carried more. And yet, the connection between us wasn't diminished. If anything, it felt richer, deeper. I wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap with words or gestures, but I hesitated, unsure if she wanted, or needed, that kind of closeness from someone younger. By the time I left the cafe that day, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets wet and glistening. I walked home with a strange mixture of clarity and uncertainty. The conversation had opened a door, a glimpse into a life layered with strength and softness, and I couldn't shake the sense that my own walls were quietly starting to crumble. I realized, with a start, that my feelings were no longer just curiosity or fleeting attraction. They were something more, something that demanded patience, care, and a willingness to navigate the delicate balance between admiration and intimacy. For the first time, I left the cafe not just wanting to see her again, but needing to. And that need, restrained yet insistent, was a sensation I was only beginning to understand. It was one of those quiet evenings when the cafe seemed suspended in a bubble of stillness. The usual bustle had faded. Only the soft hum of the espresso machine and the occasional creak of the wooden floor punctuated the air. Outside, the sky had darkened into a deep indigo, streetlights casting elongated reflections on the wet pavement. The world beyond the cafe felt distant, irrelevant, leaving only the two of us in a shared, intimate space. I was seated at our usual corner table, the one tucked near the window, with a half-empty mug of coffee in front of me. She moved around the cafe with her usual ease, yet there was a softness in her gestures that evening. Perhaps she sensed the quiet tension building between us, a slow, deliberate rhythm that didn't need words to be felt. At one point, she leaned over the counter to reach for a sugar jar. Her fingers brushed my hand as she returned it, and the contact lingered just a fraction longer than necessary. My heart reacted before my mind could catch up, warmth spreading along my arm, a subtle shiver crawling up my spine. I realized then that these small, fleeting touches had begun to carry meaning far beyond casual politeness. We began to talk, but our words slowed, hesitant, deliberate. I caught myself studying her, the curve of her lips as she spoke, the way her eyes softened when she looked at me, the quiet tilt of her head that seemed to draw me closer without effort. She asked a simple question about my day, and I found myself answering honestly, more openly than I had expected. The sound of her laughter at a small joke was gentle, carrying a warmth that seemed to settle around me, cocooning us in a space that felt almost sacred. There were pauses in the conversation, moments when neither of us spoke, and yet the silence was charged. I felt acutely aware of the subtle distance between us, an arm's length at most, our chairs angled just so. Her presence filled the space, warm and steady, and I noticed the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the rich aroma of coffee. It was intoxicating in a quiet, understated way, making every glance and movement feel amplified. At one point, I reached for my cup and accidentally brushed my fingers against hers. Neither of us moved away immediately. Instead, our hands lingered in the contact, warm, familiar, electric. It was an unspoken acknowledgement, a mutual recognition of the attraction we had been circling around, careful not to confront directly. By the time I left that night, my chest still hummed with the quiet intensity of the evening. I walked home under the streetlights, replaying the moments, the accidental touches, the soft smiles, the shared silences. Each detail etched itself into my memory, building a tension that was patient but persistent. It was clear, we were on the cusp of something neither of us had named yet. A connection that was tender, respectful, and quietly consuming. And for the first time, I realized that the distance between us, both physical and emotional, was no longer a barrier I wanted to maintain. After several weeks of frequent visits, I found myself increasingly aware of a tension I couldn't ignore, one that wasn't between us exactly, but inside me. The moments we shared, the accidental touches, the soft smiles, the lingering glances, had begun to stir feelings I wasn't sure I was ready to confront. And lurking behind those feelings was a quiet, persistent worry. Was this appropriate? Was it fair to her? Or even to myself? One busy morning, the cafe was buzzing with its usual energy. Cups clinking, the hiss of the espresso machine, faint chatter. She moved gracefully through it all, a calm presence amidst the chaos, and I watched her as she poured coffee, a simple gesture made extraordinary by the ease and confidence in her movements. And yet, when she looked at me with that knowing smile, I felt an unexpected pang of doubt. The age gap, the silent elephant in every interaction, pressed on me in moments like this. She had lived more, seen more, carried more. Could someone like her genuinely want to explore something with someone like me, someone younger, inexperienced in ways that mattered? I worried that my feelings, though sincere, were unbalanced in the eyes of reality. I withdrew slightly that day, taking my coffee to a table in the corner and focusing on the steam curling above the cup. I noticed her glance toward me now and then, subtle but questioning, and I felt a quiet ache of guilt mixed with longing. Her warmth had always drawn me in, yet I feared imposing my emotions on her, uncertain if they would be welcomed or considered inappropriate. Even in mundane interactions, the hesitation showed. I was polite, attentive, but careful to maintain a distance that was almost painful to keep. Each time her hand brushed mine, I flinched inwardly, aware of how much I wanted to hold it just a moment longer. Each laugh that lingered between us felt bittersweet, because I wondered if I was reading too much into it. The more I thought, the more the tension gnawed at me. I replayed our past conversations in my head, analyzing each gesture, each glance, each word for hidden meaning or subtle rejection. But no matter how I rationalized it, the truth remained. My desire to be closer to her was growing faster than my courage to express it. By the time I left that morning, the city felt heavier, the streets more crowded, and my own thoughts louder than ever. I walked with a tight knot in my chest, torn between wanting to retreat to safety and wanting to step closer, to bridge the gap that seemed both real and imagined. I realized that if I wanted any chance at a genuine connection, I would need to confront these doubts, to acknowledge the age difference without letting it define the emotional space between us. The cafe had become more than a place to drink coffee. It was a mirror reflecting my own hesitations and desires. And I knew, deep down, that the story of us, if it was to continue, would require patience, honesty, and the courage to face the very fears that now held me back. It was late evening when I returned to the cafe that day, the world outside cloaked in the soft glow of streetlights. The bustle of the day had faded, leaving only the quiet hum of conversation and the gentle hiss of the espresso machine. I stepped inside and immediately felt the familiar warmth, the rich aroma of coffee, the polished wood, and most of all, her presence. She looked up from behind the counter, and our eyes met. That small smile of hers, the one that had haunted my thoughts for weeks, was there, and it struck me with a clarity that made my chest tighten. I hesitated for a moment, unsure how to begin. The weeks of self-doubt, the quiet tension of unspoken feelings, the constant awareness of our age gap, all of it pressed on me. But the pull of wanting to bridge the distance between us was stronger than any hesitation. I approached her counter slowly, feeling my own heartbeat loud in the quiet of the cafe. She greeted me as always, casual yet attentive. "You're here late," she said softly, her voice carrying that familiar warmth. I nodded, struggling for words, then decided honesty was the only way forward. I've been avoiding saying something. I began, my voice quieter than I intended. But I can't keep pretending that I'm just here for coffee. Her eyes softened immediately, and she leaned slightly closer, a subtle acknowledgement of the tension between us. I continued, letting the words tumble out carefully. "I like being here, with you more than I expected. I don't know if it's inappropriate, or if you feel the same, but I needed to tell you." There was a pause, a moment suspended in air, charged with everything we hadn't said before. And then, her hand reached across the counter. Gentle, deliberate, and steady, her fingers brushed mine and lingered. I felt the warmth radiating through her touch, the quiet steadiness of her presence, and it was like an anchor. She spoke then, softly. I felt it too, more than I probably should have let myself admit. Her eyes held something tender, something patient, and it was as if every moment of hesitation between us melted away in that simple, honest confession. We sat together at our usual corner table, the light from the lamp casting a warm halo over the two of us. Our conversation slowed, deliberate and unhurried, each word carrying weight, each glance a quiet affirmation. I noticed the subtle changes, the tilt of her head as she listened, the gentle brush of her hand against mine, the softness in her smile when I looked at her. For the first time, the age gap felt less like a barrier and more like a nuance in the rhythm of our connection. It wasn't the difference in years that defined us. It was the patience, the honesty, and the quiet acknowledgement of desire and respect. Fingers intertwined across the table, our palms pressed together, warm and steady. I felt the pulse of her heartbeat beneath my fingertips, a soft, persistent reminder of the intimacy that had grown between us without words. By the time I left the cafe that night, I carried with me a calm certainty. The tension had shifted, transformed into connection. For the first time, I didn't just anticipate our visits. I knew that whatever came next, it would be built on honesty, patience, and a quiet, unwavering bond. Weeks had passed since that quiet evening when I finally spoke, when our feelings were laid bare without pretense or hesitation. The cafe, once just a refuge from the busy city, had become a place of shared rhythm, of moments that belonged entirely to us. Every visit carried the familiar comfort of routine, but now it was layered with a quiet intimacy I hadn't known I was capable of experiencing. One late afternoon, I arrived to find her arranging fresh flowers in a small vase on the counter. The light from the window painted her hair in shades of gold, and for a moment, I paused at the doorway, simply observing. She looked up, caught my gaze, and smiled. The kind of smile that could hold both teasing warmth and quiet reassurance. I realized then how deeply she had embedded herself into my thoughts, my days, my quiet moments of reflection. We settled into our corner table, side by side, just as we had countless times before. The cafe was quiet except for the soft hum of background music and the faint clatter of a cup being set down. She reached for my hand first, her fingers slipping gently into mine. The warmth of her touch traveled slowly through me, grounding me in the moment. Our hands rested together, no need for words, the silence between us speaking volumes. I watched her as she sipped her coffee, the gentle tilt of her head, the subtle relaxation of her shoulders, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled at something I said. There was a softness to her that had grown alongside my own comfort, quiet, unspoken, and entirely human. I realized that the barriers I had imagined, the age gap, the difference in experience, the hesitation of societal expectation, had dissolved in the simple, steady connection we had built together. We laughed softly at small jokes, leaned closer across the table when exchanging confidences, and occasionally brushed hands in gestures that had become second nature. Each touch was deliberate yet unforced, carrying meaning in its restraint. A brush of her fingers against my forearm, a lingering clasp of hands, the subtle shift of her shoulder against mine. All small, intimate signals of a bond deepening naturally. At one point, she rested her head lightly against my shoulder as we shared a quiet laugh, and I felt the steady beat of her heart against mine. The warmth, the rhythm, the closeness, it was all-consuming in a way that felt safe, steady, and enduring. For the first time, I understood that love didn't need to be loud or dramatic. It could be patient, tender, and deeply human, built in quiet moments that revealed themselves gradually. When I finally left the cafe that evening, the world outside felt softer, more vivid, the streetlights shimmering like reflections of the quiet joy I carried. I thought of her smile, her steady hand in mine, the shared silence that had become more powerful than any words. The story that had begun with a teasing remark, "You're too handsome to just drink coffee," had unfolded into a connection neither of us had rushed into, but one that had grown quietly, insistently, and completely. It was a story of patience, subtle longing, and mutual respect. And as I walked home, I knew that our bond was not a fleeting moment. It was a steady, warm presence in both of our lives. The cafe had become more than a place. It had become a symbol of a connection that was honest, enduring, and entirely our own.